I'm Xander Wilson, and welcome to another episode of the Silver Bullet podcast. This podcast is about lessons learned in running a business, with a strong focus on startup founders and CEOs. It's all about finding out what gaps these disruptors have identified in the market, what they're doing differently to their competitors, and of course, to find out their silver bullet for business success. On today's episode of the Silver Bullet podcast, I'm chatting with Peter Petroulis, founder and CEO of the world's first AI-powered intelligent restaurant booking system, WizButler. During the podcast, we chat about how technology is shaping the hospitality industry, the challenges of educating businesses on the benefit of your product, and why the best form of leadership is getting in the trenches alongside your employees. So Peter, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me on. Appreciate your time.
So Peter, for those who might not be familiar with WizButler, what is WizButler? Give us your elevator pitch.
It's a restaurant booking system, unlike any other restaurant booking system, because while we take restaurant bookings and restaurant reservations, we do it in a completely different way, in a completely different format, in which case we guarantee your optimization and we guarantee you will never reject a booking.
Yeah, fantastic. And if you go right back to the start, how did the company get started? And I guess as part of that question too, where did the idea come from, and what sort of gap in the market were you trying to solve with this?
I became a restaurateur, if I can use the term, about 20 years ago. So I've sort of been in the restaurant industry for the last 20 years. And in the beginning, it was all telephone reservations. So therefore, it was straightforward. You had your telephone reception team, and they took the calls. Then, as time went on, online booking systems started to take hold and get traction in the marketplace. And customers obviously appreciated the convenience because they weren't limited to, when your reception team was open to take calls. So calls could be made at midnight, at 3 a.m. It sort of didn't matter. But then what we quickly found is that the booking systems were inefficient, and a restaurant would get to 60-65% full, except the booking systems thought it was 100% full. So all of a sudden then we're getting telephone calls from our customers saying, hey, I tried to book online because it was convenient to them, but I couldn't get in. Can you get me in? And we're looking at our reservation system and we're only 60% full. And we're sort of scratching our heads saying, hey, this is not working for us, because we got disgruntled customers and we're losing revenue.
Yeah, and you did mention, it's completely different from other booking systems out there. That there are probably a few that people might be familiar with as well. How is it that we sort of got to this point where those inefficiencies existed, and were you surprised that those did exist within the infrastructure that was available to you at the time?
Look, I guess I wasn't surprised that they existed because the problem is complex. Because with a booking system, the question you have is, how do I allocate a booking? So if you've got 100 tables in there, then you go and allocate it to a table. But when you allocate it, you actually don't know what the next booking will be, or the booking request after that. So wherever you put a booking, it's going to be wrong because you don't have any future information. So it's that sort of conundrum of, how do I solve a problem when I don't have the full information? And other booking systems and other people have tried to solve that for the last 20 years, since OpenTable started the first booking system, without success. And when I started this journey, I guess I wasn't sure I was going to have success either.
Yeah, fair enough. And what role does artificial intelligence play in this? Obviously reading about a lot of the stuff you guys have been doing, it seems like it's a system that's continuing to learn. And we have seen artificial intelligence, I guess, really grow in popularity across a lot of digital platforms. So for you guys, at what point did you go, we need artificial intelligence to help us here? And then how is it working exactly?
Well, in our case, we're only at the beginnings of artificial intelligence, because what we've done, by having that complete different structure and a completely different framework, a lot of it could be done based on the framework and the approach. And now that we're sort of getting that and getting more data and collecting more data, then obviously we can move into the next phase of it, which then starts bringing in yield management, which was a completely new concept for restaurants. which is sort of something they do with aviation and hospitality, where potentially, if you want a better room that overlooks the harbour and it's got greater utility and ambience than a room that sort of faces the back of the hotel and you sort of see the laneway, well, potentially you can bring that into restaurants as well, because now you can differentiate your product because through our system, it knows which space within the restaurant has a better ambience and better utility versus another space which may be at the back of the restaurant next to the kitchen door. And then the artificial intelligence can be brought in to start sort of potentially pricing the two tables differently or giving different priorities to the two tables. And where I see the real benefit there for the customer is they can then start personalising their experience, because it's no longer Russian roulette when you turn up at a restaurant. Will I be given a good table? And what will my experience be versus being given a bad table, which isn't the same experience? And if you take it, if it's a person's special birthday, anniversary, a very important business meeting, well, they're not risks you really want to take. Or if you're travelling overseas and you want to have that special dinner seeing the Empire State Building, well, you really want to see the Empire State Building. You don't want to be sitting at the back of the restaurant next to the kitchen, and your experience will be totally shattered.
Yeah, and when you first started pitching this to the market, what were the initial responses? Was it a difficult sell for you guys? Were people really responsive to getting on a system to sort of fix the initial issues, or what was that experience like for you in the first instance?
Well, in the first instance, it was just really trying to get a message across that bookings were being rejected when you're 60% full. And a lot of people didn't understand that. And the reason they didn't understand it is because they still have a full complement of reservation staff. So even though they'd sort of put on these online booking systems, which look amazing from a customer facing perspective, behind the scenes, they were still all sort of being manually done. They were always manually done. So why would you think they can be done differently? And it was trying to explain to them that they actually were missing out on bookings, that things could be done more efficiently, and that they had a problem which they didn't fully appreciate.
Yeah, and obviously the last couple of years have been challenging for a lot of people in the industry due to COVID, the pandemic bringing up all sorts of issues. Not just you can't get people in your restaurant, but also the reopening also had its own issues that came with it. Did that make it more challenging to pitch this to people to invest in when they might have been going through harder financial situations themselves?
If you just take it back to the basics of a restaurant, through the pandemic and through all the labour shortages that everybody's read about in the newspaper, how do you convince a restaurant owner or restaurant manager to actually bring their staff in, pay extra money to do training, and take them off the floor when they don't have enough staff to actually put your system in? It becomes a hard sell because they really care about the short-term issues rather than what benefits may arrive after a month's time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess how did you overcome those sorts of challenges, or has it just become easier as the reopening has gained momentum?
Well, I guess two things. Obviously, it's become easy as the reopening has happened, but most of our leads and our new customers, word of mouth from existing customers. Because then it's sort of coming from a credible source where they've experienced the difference, as distinct to sort of knocking and cold calling to someone who doesn't really appreciate that problem that they have, or the problem they don't know they have, can be addressed.
Yeah, for sure. And there's some news recently from WizButler gaining that US patent that valued the business at $275 million US. What's the real world significance for that for you and the company? Is it just having that recognition? Is it something beyond that?
Well, I guess from the beginning, what we wanted to do was get a product in the marketplace. The patent was merely sort of protection, if I can call it that. It wasn't the end game. If it was the end game, then we just would have lodged the patent application, waited for the end result, and then looked to resell it. But we're in the process for the long haul, and hence we've developed the software. We continue developing the software, and the whole process the whole process and the end game is to get it out there and to add some value to restaurants.
Yeah, and just taking a step back from WizButler at the moment, I just wanted to get a bit more background on your career and your experience as well. I find on this podcast that tends to be quite a good barometer for how people ended up founding a company. So we already spoke a bit about your background working in restaurant management and that sort of thing. I guess how else did your experience sort of shape you in a way that you felt confident enough to go, I'm going to stop doing that, I'm going to start doing this?
Well, I guess I started a traditional fashion. Finished high school, went to university, got my degree, got a master's degree, sort of started moving up the corporate ladder, and which is, I guess, the simplest and the traditional way of doing things. Ended up being a finance director of a small airline at the age of 27. Um, and then sort of stayed in aviation and travel for a long time. Ended up being the finance director of Air Niugini in Papua New Guinea for 8 years as well. And sort of a year in London in a travel company. And then at the end of it all, which had taken me away from Sydney, I decided to come back to Sydney. And instead of sort of staying in the corporate world, I guess midlife crisis, or however it's been defined in the past, I decided to do something different, and hence ventured out and started my own restaurant group.
Yeah, and I guess from those experiences, and now you're on the other side of it. Do you miss being hands on as part of it? Do you miss running your own restaurants and that sort of thing?
Well, with the software, it's also very hands-on. I mean, it's a different approach. I get involved with the wireframing, the what do you call it, flow charting, as far as the scoping of development works. From that perspective, obviously staying in touch with restaurants as our customers, and we go into detail through that and how those restaurants can be improved. And I guess the thing that sort of helped me is that when I talk to a restaurant customer, I understand their problems, and it's not a matter of just implementing the software within the business, but it's the right way of implementing the software within their business. And I think that's where it makes the difference, and that's where they sort of get a fair bit of mileage out of what we try to do here at WizButler.
Yeah, and when you reflect back on some of those experiences, in the corporate world, in the restaurateur world, and then you come to your company, WizButler, starting from scratch. Were there any practices, whether it's I guess culturally or business wise, that you wanted to replicate at WizButler? And on the other flip side, and I find this is something that people are able to answer sometimes more easily, are there any cultural or business practices you wanted to avoid in starting your own company?
I guess as far as what I learned through my corporate career, and I guess if I go back to aviation, we were a small airline, so we had to think differently. We had to adapt. We had to sort of take on the big guys like Qantas and Ansett back in the day. So you learn to be flexible. You didn't sort of have any fixed ideas, and you had to be in a nimble company, which is what we were. And then that sort of flowed through. And that sort of helped me when I went into the restaurant environment, because again, you started looking at things differently, not that necessarily the way a restaurant was run before or how someone else had done it before, but what does a customer want? What's missing in the marketplace? And it's through that process that you tend to sort of, I guess, find opportunities or see problems that maybe someone else doesn't see. Or alternatively, when you're looking at solving something, you don't necessarily go down the same, trodden path, because if you do that, well, you've achieved nothing different anyway. So I guess what I've learned firstly is to be nimble, to be flexible, always look for an alternate solution rather than what may be the common solution. And then when you come back to corporate culture, it's that same thing, and that same thinking process, where again you want everybody to think differently. Because if you get 10 people in the room and they all think the same, well, really, you don't need nine of them. And that's that cross fertilization of ideas that makes the difference.
Yeah, and that essentially leads me quite well onto my next question, which is sort of what have you found to be the biggest challenges in starting a company, and I guess hiring the right people is one of those, right? And you spoke about that whole thing of cross fertilization ideas of people thinking differently. How have you gone about the process of trying to get the right people on board?
I guess, again, if I go back to my background, as I said, I initially became a finance director of a significant company when I was 27. I had 130 staff working for me at that time. Now, when you're 27 years old and you've got people who are 40 and 50 years old working for you, you don't lead by telling people what to do. You lead by getting in the trenches with them and showing them that you care, you understand, and you're in it together. And then it's the same thing now with the startup, that everybody feels part of the team. Everybody is treated the same. There is no hierarchy. There is no sort of communication channels. Everybody's door is open. And it's that sort of whole community sort of team spirit that makes a difference, I believe, in any organisation. And that's the advantage I think any startup has over any existing company. Because as time goes on, maybe and when you get into thousands and tens of thousands of staff, well, then maybe you need to bring in these formal communication channels because you can't, survive any other way.
Yeah, and I guess outside of just the hiring, what else have been, I guess, the steepest learning curves in terms of getting WizButler off the ground and running and where you are today?
I guess how long it takes to get an idea into a practical outcome. It's one thing to turn around and say, we'll do something, and then to actually go and document it and code it and test it and make sure it works. The journey is always a lot longer than what you think it is. We started this process, and I guess if you look at our patent applications, our first patent application was lodged in 2017. It took over 5 years just to get the first patent application through the door. So there's no quick, easy solution to anything. And you've really got to do the hard work on the hard yards to get there.
Yeah, and I guess you look forward at the next 6 to 12 months, and then possibly even a few years down the track, what does that look like for you guys? Where would you like to see yourself, further down the track? And have you considered things like international expansion and all those sorts of things?
Absolutely. I guess, like all the other booking systems, the beauty of them is that it's the same booking system and the same rules apply to a restaurant in Australia as they do in the United States, as they do in the United Kingdom. The customers still have the same expectations. So, in many ways, the only barriers we have to expanding overseas is really just changing the software to show different currency and a different GST if applicable. And that's for sort of the English speaking world. And then for the other countries, it's merely just a translation of language as distinct to a translation of, any coding or any algorithms or formulas or anything else. So it becomes a pretty simple exercise to take the product overseas. And absolutely, that's where our focus will be within the next 12 months.
Yeah, definitely. And I sort of just wanted to ask you little bit of a side question, just sort of for my own personal interest. But we're seeing the obviously Australian restaurants seem really rebound, but obviously problems still exist. Talent shortages are still happening, even though we're seeing people coming from overseas to work here now. What do you think? What some of the biggest challenges that the industry itself faces over the next few years, sort of trying to get back to where it was and that sort of thing?
What sort of happened with COVID is that a lot of the experienced people and professionals went out and explored, changing their careers, retrained themselves, and now re-established in other fields. And now with the wave of people that you're getting in, they don't have the same experience. They don't have the same knowledge and they have the same background. So therefore, it's no longer a matter of replacing one with one. Potentially, you need to replace one with two because they don't have that background. So I think it'll take a while until now the new people in hospitality are trained. Um, But I guess more importantly, I see technology playing a far bigger part in all restaurants. We're sort of getting these pockets happening because you're getting better booking systems. You're getting ordering systems. There's different ways of paying, and the dockets going into the kitchen. The recent introduction of robotics, where you're sort of having your little robotic way to bring out your food. I think all of these things will now come together, and you'll see a huge shift to more technology, and people then having to upskill themselves to be able to manage this technology.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see where the industry goes. And just to my final question, which is the namesake for this podcast, which is the silver bullet. So the question being, if you had to put it down to a few things, what would be your silver bullet for business success? And just as a bit of background, it doesn't even have to be something that's related to a business practice. Quite often people come on here and say it's going for a surf in the morning, or a mindset or a philosophy. But if you had to put it down to a few things that have, helped you get to where you are today, what would you put that down to?
Look, if I could quote Steve Jobs, and his approach going back is just think different. It's that thinking different that makes you stand out in the crowd. It's that thinking different that allows you to take on challenges. Thinking better won't cut the mustard. It's not enough to make a difference. And I guess, even if you're talking about, when you go for a run in the morning or whatever you're doing, in your relaxation, or whether you're meditating, I still think it's that process. If you've got some time to yourself, think different. You'll look at the problem differently, and you'll probably amaze yourself as to, what you come up with.
Yeah, it's a great way of thinking about it. Anyway, Peter Petroulis, founder and CEO of WizButler, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate being here.